we've done no prep for this. I didn't even tell you, like, what should we talk about?
Oh, good. I'm sure you've got something in mind.
Well, I do, only because you've been talking so much about it, and it's the topic du jour, and it's part of the focus of this season, which is curiosity. I saw you gave a talk on it recently somewhere, or maybe multiple talks on it.
I do like the word curiosity. Yes.
But we could talk about that. There's a couple of things that I was thinking about, and let me know which one would be of interest to you. Which one sparks your curiosity? One is I'd love to talk about curiosity from a neuroscience perspective. Definitely,
Okay.
we have the general idea of what curiosity is, but I am curious about what's happening in the brain and why you're so interested in the concept of curiosity. Another thing that I would be interested in talking with you about, and that I'm just curious about, is I am deeply curious about who you are, Dr. Jud, how you got to be you, and this super successful but also laid back achiever, balanced achiever. And it's something that I'm increasingly interested in, is how you can stand out without burning out.
Either or both.
Okay,
You want to
maybe they're
start with
related.
the story?
Yeah, start with the story.
Okay. And then, yeah, and then I think curiosity is a pretty well demarcated topic that we could talk about separately. Yeah.
Okay. So this concept of how to stand out without burning out is related to, just to tell you, this theme of this whole season, and my whole angle right now that I'm working on is wise effort. And from a Buddhist perspective, but from a psychological perspective. And so I see you as an example of someone that's really demonstrating wise effort in their life. Um, so we can talk about that as well. But yeah, tell me the story of how you are the example of wise effort, Dr. Jed.
Well, that's very kind of you,
Yeah.
and I'm honored to be considered in that in that same sentence as wise effort.
Hmm.
So we could, yeah, let's have that conversation because I haven't really thought of myself in that way, but maybe we can unpack that together and see what that looks like. The, I don't know where things got started, but one thing that comes to immediately to mind is that my college counselor told me I would never get into Princeton, so I applied to Princeton. And I think that's one memorable piece of my history, and this is certainly, I get to tell it from the perspective of where I am now. So take that with a grain of salt. But I do remember really loving challenges. And in high school, I loved I loved physics. I just thought it was so cool that, there were these Newtonian equations that could explain, how things worked. I remember riding in our cross country van to a cross country meet and, just learned one of the laws of, the equations of motion, and was dropping things from the top of this is a little geeky, but whatever. Dropping objects from the top of the van and timing how long it took to hit the floor, and then using that to measure the height of the van. And I just thought that was so cool. You didn't need
Okay,
a
wait, but
ruler.
both of those are curiosity. Like, someone tells me I can't get into Princeton. I'm curious. Could I?
Yeah.
And I'm learning about this stuff around physics, and I'm curious. What happens if I drop this from the top? Like, could I figure that out using these principles of physics? So those are both, yeah, definitely
Yeah.
examples of curiosity.
And I'd like to say I was wise enough when my counselor told me that I couldn't get in, that I was like, I'm curious if I could, because I think it was more like, screw you. I'm going
Oh,
to,
I'll show you.
but, but certainly let's say that there was some curiosity in there, like, well, I wonder if I can get in. So let me apply and see what happens.
Well,
And, and
I'd rather be on that side of the things than the side that I was on, which is everyone told me I'd get into Yale and I didn't. Now that's a
well,
worse place to be in. Like, if you have the bar low and then you don't meet it, the low bar, you're like, oh, but yeah, I had the you're gonna get in, you're gonna get in, you're gonna get in, and then ego blow to the floor when you don't. Everyone was hearing it was your school that you were going to. So
yeah, wow.
yeah.
And what a great character moment, right? Like it's moments like that, in my opinion, where we learn the most and grow the most. than when things work out, so
Yeah.
and of course, it's never fun to be on the receiving end of no.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm really curious how did you deal with that to turn it
Oh,
back to you?
not well. I mean, I went to, like, a private prep school where it was, where you went to school was a little dot that they would put on a map, and then they, put your school flag there. It was a very public event of where people went to school. But what's interesting for me is that I did get into Yale for graduate school, and, I turned them down. So, maybe I'm a little bit like you, like, "Screw you. I don't even wanna go there." So, but yeah, I didn't do well. I was in high school. It wasn't good for me. I ended up actually going to a UCSB, which was at that time not considered a prestigious. Now it's like actually a really great UC school. It does really well, but at that time it
Yeah.
wasn't considered a prestigious place to go,
Well,
especially from the private prep school.
mm, well,
Yeah,
certainly better surfing at UCSB than at Yale, but,
yeah. I had some
let's
good beach time. Yeah,
let's just leave it at that, and obviously you did all right.
yeah, yeah. It's actually
So
kind of nice to be in a spot where there aren't those kinds of expectations, right?
Mhm.
Because I could just go and find the professors that I wanted to work with, and it wasn't for prestige reasons because I was curious. Okay, so you got into Yale, and then you were, into physics early on.
Well, yeah, so I got into
I'm
Princeton
sorry, so you
and
got into Princeton, and you were into
Princeton.
physics early on, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad I hearing your story, I'm glad I didn't apply to Yale. Though anyway, I'll just leave it at that. And I remember in high school being surprised that I'd gotten into Princeton because that I was just interested in learning. So going back to the curiosity theme, and so I didn't focus that much on my grades. I wasn't like a C student, but I wasn't a straight A student. And I was just loving life, learning stuff. And I think I carried that forward into college and, didn't feel a lot of pressure to, try to achieve in college either. I'm not even sure what that would look like. Because I felt like a kid in a candy store, if assuming that the kid likes candy, where it's like this, bonanza of learning where just I could, and I don't think Princeton's unique in that way. But I remember in my freshman chemistry class learning about these molecules like called putrescine and cadaverine. And I know this sounds a little morbid. But I was like, wow, that's why cadavers stink is because of this fatty acid molecule. It's so cool. And so I wanted to become a chemist because I just love these molecules that like were life. It's like you think you have a thought, you have an urge because of a molecule. And I just thought that was really neat. And went well into my junior year thinking I was going to become a chemist and then took a step back, realizing that, I could easily pigeonhole myself into studying some very small esoteric field of chemistry, and at that point had been very, like I went to a Jesuit high school where, it was like, our motto was people for others. And so and actually Princeton was in Princeton in the nation's service, or maybe it's in the world service now or something, but there was this service oriented thing that was kind of in the background there. And I think that came to the fore where I love doing research, that's all about curiosity, discovering things, learning things. And at the same time, I wanted to have the research that I did be relevant to helping people. And I remember learning from my girlfriend at the time that I could do what was called an MD PhD program, which I'd never heard of, but not just going the route of a PhD and becoming a researcher that way, but also doing medically related research. And so I quickly shifted gears and apply, kind of got myself ready to apply to medical school my junior year. I remember, don't tell my medical school, but I didn't actually complete all of my pre-med requirements. And somehow I snuck in. You didn't do all the math courses that I was supposed to be doing, whatever. But just went in this track of medical research. And also when I started medical school, started meditating. My first day of medical school, started meditating because I was pretty stressed out starting medical school and had no idea that I had no idea about how my mind worked. And so this meditation thing kind of came upon me. I started reading this book by John Kabat-Zinn, Full Catastrophe Living, this back in the day, this well-known book, and started listening to these things called cassette tapes, and
Yeah.
where I started meditating, and it helped me start to explore a world that I never even knew was right in me, that we all have inside of us, right in front of me, that I just never paid attention to. It was really just focused on like go, 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 go.
Mhm.
And
Well, certainly a curious mind can have a lot of fun with meditation because it's a curious mind that gets to just totally explore what's happening in the mind, and I could imagine that was another avenue for you to get
it
curious about.
absolutely, absolutely. So it was, I could be curious about how the world worked, how the body. So in medical school is like, how does the body and mind work? I was really interested in like why we get sick when we get stressed, and I was studying that, using molecular biology, and but looking in mouse models. And here I was looking at my own mind and just really exploring like how's this mind work as well? And how does it, started getting interested in this question that came from the Buddhist psychology of like, why do we suffer? And why do I suffer? And why do I, how does suffering happen where I'm contributing to this, not only my own suffering, but the suffering of others, like, and a lot of it was coming back to selfishness, self-centered. I was pretty focused on myself in high school and in college, and, medical school. Thankfully, I started waking up to that and seeing that, like it's that can be helpful, and it can also get in the way of flourishing, not only for myself and for other people. And so just starting to explore that myself, I got really interested in shifting my career from molecular biology to dedicating it to studying the mind, and in particular like cravings, habits, and addiction. And so that piece, that curiosity carried me into that. And also another moment where somebody told me that I was going to kill my career. I wasn't going to make it. It said, because I remember in residency, I actually went to Yale for residency, but I remember somebody in my residency class saying, Judd, you're going to kill your career if you study this mindfulness stuff, because it's
Mhm.
all rainbows and unicorns and incense. And I remember thinking and making a deal with myself that very specifically, like I was going to, where they had no, the treatments were just really not optimal. They still aren't optimal. I think we still have a long way to go with it with regard to addiction treatment, because addictions are really challenging things to work with. And so there was this motivation in just seeing all the suffering of my patients, starting to get a handle on, oh, this is how the mind works a little bit, and then also seeing how I could bring those together. And I think that, it, all of that buoyed together by curiosity, just being really curious, like, oh, well, nobody's gone down this road before. Let's go down this road and explore it a bit more.
Yeah.
And I think that's really been a driving force all along. I haven't focused so looking back over the last 20 years of my career, I haven't focused on a specific technique or a specific, malady or flourishing. It's really just been following my curiosity. So I started with like, oh, can we use mindfulness to help people with alcohol and cocaine? Yes. Oh, can we use this to help people quit smoking? Yes. Oh, 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment. How does it work? Well, let's explore that. Oh, how do meditators' brains work? Well, let's explore that. So I had to retool, learn neuroimaging. Well, is it really true? Does that line up with their subjective experience? Oh, I had to learn neurophenomenologic techniques. And so it's like just learning the techniques as I was going to answer questions that I didn't know how to answer, but just really being willing to just go there and fail, and along the way to learn a ton. And I
Yeah.
think that's really been a consistent theme, is like, I don't care if I'm not an expert. I'll find an expert that I can collaborate with. But here's a question that seems really interesting and relevant, that's going to be helpful. Not just some little esoteric question, but it's like, how can we help people break bad habits? Like that seems pretty relevant. And can we go back to basic principles instead of just following along what everybody else is doing? Can we look to see if we've missed something as a field, or if there's something emerging that we could be applying? And that's where, it ironically came back to this ancient Buddhist psychology, that had been around forever, that people were starting to kind of rediscover in modern times. And then also how I was seeing that come together with this modern neuroscience that I'd been learning and studying and doing some of the neuroscience research myself. And just to see those two come together and follow that road, I mean, that's really, talk about life giving and energy giving. Like who would ever get burnt out just following those questions?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's you at the on the cross country bus dropping the ball or whatever you were like, this is fun. Let me see what happens. And then it will generate another question. And it does fit. I mean, the way that I'm conceptualizing wise effort, obviously there's the Buddhist conceptualization of it, which has to do with the Eightfold Path, which can inform this, that sort of dialing up the effort or dialing down the effort based on what is sort of the wholesome seeds that you're watering and then abandoning the unwholesome, right? That which
Mhm.
you don't want to water. But the way that I'm conceptualizing it, it has these 3 components. One part is curiosity, which has driven so much of what you were describing. Just I was curious this, so I went here, I was curious about that. I'm building more curiosity as I go. It's kind of never ending. The second component is flexibility, and I
Mm,
heard a lot of flexibility in there. I didn't get like rigid, I am the person who is identified with this theme or this word and so therefore I have to stay in that box for the rest of my life. And we see researchers do that. They get
mhm.
like locked down by their own selves
Yes.
and they get inflexible because they're just trying to prove their own idea, right? So there has been flexibility in your career and flexibility in really integration of different ideas, flexibly moving with those ideas as they move and innovations show up. And I see that with technology in you. You've been innovative and really at the cutting edge of technology in terms of some of the bringing these practices to more people. And then the third part, so we have curiosity, flexibility. The third part is about wise action.
Mm,
It's like it's actually taking action
mhm,
and not just thinking about stuff, but you're a doer. You create, you make stuff happen with the support of other people. And
mhm,
it's wise action in the service of something. So wise action in the service of your values or in the service of the greater good, as opposed to wise action, as opposed to, I would say, unwise action is just acting to build up your own ego or acting to get accolades or positive evaluations or good jobs, which is maybe how you started out in high school. Who knows? But that sort of transformed for you in medical school, where it became about more than just being the top of your class, but actually really about helping people.
Yeah, yeah, and just to highlight a couple of things there, I have to give a lot of credit to my mom who never pressured me to do anything. I think she just really supported the learning. She was big into learning, which is why she was pretty adamant about us. She had raised 4 kids by herself, so she was pretty adamant about us going to Jesuit high schools because that in Indiana, the Jesuits were very focused on education and learning, and so she was very into learning herself and
Mhm.
kind of fostered that curiosity in all of us. And so there was never pressure or drive to be this, whatever this is versus that. And I think that was really, looking back on it, was really, really helpful. The other
Mhm.
thing I'll say is that I see those 3 pieces that you're talking about really building on each other and supporting each other. And you probably thought about this a lot more than I have, but just kind of hearing those 3 pieces, if you look at curiosity itself, we can be curious about like, oh, where do I find fulfillment versus not? And double click on that, like what is fulfilling? Because, I think there's a huge pressure in let's whether it's consumerism or growth economies or whatever, in this Western culture around be more, get more, do more. And then somehow that's going to equal happiness. And yet that just leads to the well trodden and well known hedonic treadmill. Right. And so even though that phenomena is known, people haven't gotten off of it. And so I would say the curiosity can help all of us ask, am I just on this hedonic treadmill? And what is happiness? I remember reading this quote that really threw me for a loop. This teacher, Saida U Pandita, actually put it in my first book, where he talks about people mistaking the excitement of the mind for happiness, and they don't find the greater happiness and joy or happiness that comes from like peace and tranquility and joy. And I think that right there, if we if we bring curiosity in and ask, oh, what actually makes me happy, in a way that's not just based on excitement and consuming, somewhere. I think somebody traced this back to the 15th century around Shakespeare's time, where happiness got equated with excitement. And that was a huge, I would say, if we looked at
Yeah.
turnings of human, I would say that was a path that we started going down that's really led to a whole lot of suffering and destruction. Because the excitement, motivation is critical for survival. But if we start socializing that as happiness, it's going to lead to a consumerism that's never going to be satisfied. So I just want to highlight that, because so many people wake up way too late in life and realize, oh, this hedonic treadmill is just wearing me down. Talk about burnout.
Well, yeah, and I also think we undervalue that which brings us contentment, because it's not always things that, look good on the outside. It's you're in a lucky spot that what brings you contentment is also things that are highly valued currently in our culture. Like you have a lot of contentment out of being a researcher and exploring these concepts that is also something that is socially very lauded, right? And
Right.
and I have, similar things like that, like doing the type of work I do, I find a lot of contentment. But actually, I was when you were saying what brings you happiness, I was just thinking that through my head. What has brought me happiness in the last, 24 hours? I was sweeping my patio with my son. It was so enjoyable. It was first of all, it was really satisfying to get all the leaves off our patio. We're getting ready for a barbecue, and it was that feeling of, oh, we're working together around the house, and my son, I'm actually getting him to my teenager, getting him to do something with
Wow.
me.
That
Yeah, it
is
was
a feat.
amazing. And it was outdoors. It very simple sweeping. It's a very actually satisfying activity. I mean, we think about, sweeping as almost meditative. But that's not necessarily something that anyone would be like, "Great, good job, you swept your patio today." It's quite ordinary. But one of the things that I'm reading this book by Cal Newport. Another thing I'm doing with my son is reading this book by Cal Newport about how to be a high school superstar. And the
Mm,
title kind of made me kind of like want to not read it, but it's actually really good, because what he is talking about is how to do high school differently. And we can think about this as adults, like how to do our adulthood differently, where we're actually pursuing, he has these 3 laws. The law of he called the law of underscheduling. So pack your schedule with free time and use the time to explore. So he's encouraging
mm,
high school students to like go out and do a ton of different stuff to like explore. And as opposed to what they're all trained to do is do way too many extracurricular activities and then just be like everyone else that has straight A's and a million extracurricular activities.
mhm.
Right. And then the second was the law of focus, master a serious interest and don't waste time on unrelated activities. So kind of get into something that you're interested in and master it. And then the third was a law of innovation, pursue accomplishments that are hard to explain, but not hard to do,
Oh,
which was
that's
kind of
nice.
interesting, right?
Yeah.
So I think about, like my younger son is really into beekeeping with us, and it's you could spend a whole day explaining what you do in beekeeping, but it's actually quite simple. It doesn't require a lot of, it's just simple, but it has things that are hard to explain. So there's those qualities in you, right? That you pursue exploration, mastering an interest, and then doing things that are very hard to explain. But I don't know, maybe I don't know if it is not hard to do what you do. It probably is kind of hard to do what you do, but
Yeah, and it doesn't feel hard. If I mean, certainly there are times where where we come up upon what feels like a brick wall. It's like,
yeah.
oh, boom. How do we overcome this? And I would have to say, I could go, oh no, this is going to be really hard. I'd go, oh, here's a challenge. you know, and that, helps me stay open to different possibilities, different way of looking at things, and, that being flexible. It's like, okay, well, if this were easy to solve, we would have already solved it, or somebody would have solved it. So let's see if those solutions are out there. And if not, can we go back to basic principles and explore how we might approach this problem, or this challenge? And that actually brings energy to the moment as compared to feeling depleted.
Mm. So what is happening in our brain there when you're doing that? Oh, which is the Dr. Jud curious. Oh, what's happening there that is energizing to us about that brain state of
That's a
curiosity?
really good question. I don't know of any research that has specifically looked at the O. And I want to say this because there's not a ton, but there's some research on curiosity, but it's
Mhm.
only on one type of curiosity. I think there's a easier, certainly an easier paradigm to explore, which is so there. Let's just start by defining these. There are two types of curiosity. One is deprivation curiosity, and one is interest curiosity. And I like the names because they're pretty descriptive. So deprivation is when we're deprived of information. And I think of it this way: when our stomach is empty, it rumbles and it says, go get some food. It's actually, there's a dopamine drive there that's motivating, and that's been well characterized. And analogously, and literally in a similar way, when we are deprived of information, our brain rumbles, so to speak, and we feel this itchy urge to go get that information. And that is also, both of those help us survive. We
Mm.
get the calories and we get the information. So concrete example would be, if it's nighttime and we hear some rustling in the bushes, our brain goes on alert and says, "Oh, I don't know what that is, but either need to figure it out or run away, because this could be dangerous." And so that lack of information urges us to act, and that act is in the service of survival. Very very basic example. Yet we don't have to be scared to have lack of information in this modern day where information is at our fingertips, literally with our phones. We can be thinking, oh, what's the name of that person? And that urge to go look it up comes from being deprived of, that information being at the tip of our tongue or popping into our brains. So that is a little more straightforward to study than interest curiosity, because you can put people in an fMRI scanner, you can give them trivia questions, and if they don't know the answer, you can measure what that's like to not know the answer. It's like, I think of it as the destination. You have an urge to get somewhere. Once you get there, once you've scratched that itch, you're no longer deprived and you can move on with your day. So it comes from a lack, and that lack drives us to get back to baseline. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, deprivation curiosity. We have that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And
But it's a different kind of curiosity than this interest curiosity, which
it
doesn't get
is.
back to baseline
It is. So the
necessarily. Yeah.
deprivation curiosity, dopamine driven from what the studies have suggested. I have not yet found a neuroimaging study or any type of, brain-based study where people have actually specifically looked at interest curiosity. I hope somebody's out there doing that experiment, because that is going to be really interesting to see how the brain activity is different. And ideally, we compare deprivation to interest curiosity. That'd be a study that I would love to do, because the interest feels very different. And we've studied this phenomenologically, where, and others have as well. Deprivation curiosity feels more closed down, contracted, driven, because it's saying go get information, right? It's kind of like anger, where it's directed. It gets us to, it's motivating us to do something. Whereas interest curiosity is more that just the joy of discovery. And so you can think of it as, our eyes are narrowed when we're frustrated or angry. Oh, I got to get that information. Versus our eyes are wide open when we're just curious about something. Oh, let me look a little bit, more. If it's something, if I'm looking at a flower or some bark on a tree, it's like, I'm not narrowing my eyes, I'm opening them to get more information in. And so it's like being receptive, being flexible, being open to receiving information. And that's, I would love to see the brain imaging, but I would put a ton of money on that is not a dopaminergically driven process. It feels very different.
Mhm. Well, I think about that in terms of people. So deprivation curiosity is, I wonder how old Dr. Judd is. Is Dr. Judd married? What does Dr. does he have we know you have cats, but what kind of cats does he have? And those could be you could go Google those things and get those answers pretty quickly. Whereas interest curiosity is like, I wonder what makes Dr. Judd tick and how did this lead to that? And it leads to more and more and more questions about who you are. And if you're the receiver of interest curiosity, it's much more engaging and connecting than be the receiver of someone that's just, deprivation curious about you. Like, what can I get from you versus I'm interested in you. So
Yes.
I could see that relationally, this in the field that I work in, I think about that relationally. When I'm working with a client, I could interview them for the purposes of a diagnosis, which may be a little bit more deprivation,
Hmm.
curiosity. Like, are
Yeah.
they meeting these symptoms? And I can check those boxes. Or I could also interview them with a stance of curiosity. How do all these pieces work together as a system that are contributing to this person's problem? And what are the biopsychosocial, sort of network aspects to this human that's really interesting. And so we could use that in a lot of different ways.
And can I ask you, when you're relating to people that way, is your curiosity contagious?
Oh yeah, for sure. They get more curious about themselves.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, because I've gotten really into this whole network modeling aspect of modeling people's systems, biopsychosocial systems, which is part of process-based therapy.
Mhm.
What I find is that when I do a network model with them and we start to map it out on a piece of paper, similar to how you map out your behavioral habits, and people start to look at it from that curious perspective, they also have more compassion for themselves because they see, oh, there's all these different parts that are interacting to create this system or this problem. And it's not that I'm bad or it's my fault or it's some box that I have put myself into as like a diagnosis or whatever. And then it opens up curious avenues for solutions because, oh, we could intervene here or we could intervene here. And then there's like 10 different ways we could intervene here and 10 more ways we could intervene here. And then all these other creative ways we could do those 10 ways, right? So it just opens up. It's like a Pandora's box. Yeah.
Well, you're describing the curiosity leading directly to flexibility,
Yes.
with
There you go. And wise
intense.
action.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. This is good. This is really good. Uh, okay, can I rewind and ask you a question that I am curious about
Of
with you?
course.
Uh, so now that you are in the position, do you mentor
Mhm.
med students, grad students? Who are you mentoring
I have,
these days?
postdoctoral fellows, graduate students, undergraduates, not that many med students right now, but I've mentored med students previously.
Yeah. So what are you looking for when you're bringing people onto your team in terms of, the qualities that you want to be working with? These are folks that are carrying out a lot of the research that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say I look mostly for curiosity, because curiosity is gonna lead to a drive that doesn't get depleted and isn't based on external circumstances. So if
Mhm.
somebody wants to get through grad school and publish, 10 papers so they can get a good postdoc, you know, that that can lead to burnout if they don't achieve that. It can also lead to a drive for a product to get something done as compared to really follow the path of discovery and the joy of discovering. So I would say number 1, 2, and 3 on my list are a true curiosity.
Mhm.
Number 4 and maybe number 5, if I could stack them together, are really an interest in being helpful to the world in terms of asking questions that are not just self-focused or self-interested questions, but true questions that are going to lead to the benefit of others. And I say that because that also is an energizing mind state when we are focused on, solving problems that are going to be helpful for the world. And I think, probably most people in science are thinking that they're things that they're working on are somehow related to helping the world. But I'm looking for pragmatic, practical, folks that are focused on the pragmatics, not just, little esoteric,
Mm,
oh, here's a little piece in this very large puzzle. It's like, here's a piece that's critical for this large puzzle. So I would say curiosity, and I guess the other focused, or the helping focused, would be kindness, I guess, related.
mhm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting how many times I've had new clients come in, especially clients that may be struggling with anxiety, and I ask them about what's been helpful to them. They'll say things like, "Well, I read this book. I forget what his name is, but it's called it's like Unwinding Anxiety," or I'm like, "Uh-huh." I'm like, "I know that guy." All of a sudden I get famous for knowing someone famous. But it talk about practical, like, this is reaching people and it's helpful to them. So much so that they are then telling their therapist about it down the road. It's like, this is like actually the one thing that's actually been helpful to me because it had some concrete, tangible things that I could do that actually made me start to be able, like, I could live with my this anxiety and actually live a different life. So I know that that's the work that you do is, yes, it's very much like at the research side of things, but is it very applied and useful in people's lives. And now you have a book coming out on eating.
Mhm.
Talk about another, it's like, if we can work on our anxiety and then we can work on our health, we'd be all in a really good, much better space to be able to then help others, right? But so your book on eating applies some of these, I imagine applies some of these same principles as well.
Absolutely. Curiosity, and I would say kindness is even more key
Mhm.
with eating. It's interesting. And this actually came out of a conversation with my editor. So shout out to Caroline Sutton, who's my editor, Avery. But we were having this conversation, and she said, I feel like that, and tell me if this is true in your research and your clinical work, Judd. And she said, people feel like anxiety is something that happens to them, but eating is something that's wrong with them. And I said,
Mm.
"Oh," she just put her finger on it, where people feel like it's their fault.
Mhm.
If they can't control their eating, it's their fault. Whereas, oh, I'm an anxious person. They're identified with the anxiety. The irony is, or the paradox, or whatever, is that they both fall into the same system around where we get caught up in habitual ways of being and coping, and eating just happens to be something that we have to do to survive.
Yeah.
Whereas anxiety isn't something that is critical for survival, as much as some people might think that it is. Oh, if I'm not anxious, I'm not going to perform well. Yeah, that's a myth. Uh, but- so the eating becomes even more challenging, where we've got to unpack that layer of guilt and shame and self-judgment. Certainly people with anxiety do all of that as well, but it
Mhm.
seems really at the core of the issue when folks are really struggling with eating in the absence of hunger.
Yeah. Well, yeah, within each of these struggles, there's the more socially acceptable and the least socially acceptable, right?
Mm,
So within anxiety, sure, we can all feel socially anxious. Everyone's felt that. But if you have postpartum anxiety and, your anxiety is about, related to postpartum depression, anxiety, like harming your baby, like that, feeling shameful about that, right? So
mhm,
there's or OCD kinds of anxieties, obsessions about sexual thoughts, right? I'm not going to talk about that one publicly, right?
right.
And the same thing with food, right? So people can be orthorexic or really obsessive around their food, and it's considered to be, a strength. And then you can also have this, similar process of using food to avoid difficult feelings, but now you're overeating and it's a shameful thing. So
Mhm,
within everything, there's the socially accepted and unsocially accepted. And the curiosity part is so central because it does decouple who you are as like a human being, your worth, from the behaviors that you've gotten caught up in that
mm,
there's a lot of different reasons why you're struggling with this. And some of them have nothing to actually have a lot to do with things outside of you,
yeah,
like the
yeah,
cues you're bombarded with all the time.
right. That
Yeah.
we have no control over.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Good. Well, that book's not out till January, so folks can I don't even know it's probably even available for pre-order. Is it
It
yet?
is now available for pre-order. Yep.
Is now available for pre-order. Okay, so you'll be the first to get your January copy if you go
Yep. It's
pre-order it. What
called The
yeah,
Hunger Habit.
The
So,
Hunger Habit.
yeah.
Okay, good title to land in. I got a little preview of it, and it was fun to read. It was really good. I'm excited
Well,
about
and
that.
thank you for your feedback. It helped. It
Yeah,
helped really strengthen it, so I appreciate that.
yeah, good. Okay, Dr. Jed, as we close up, I wanna ask you, now that we've had this discussion, how would you conceptualize your own wise effort? Do you see it now?
Well, this conversation has been very enlightening. So it, I think it fits very much with that theme that you've been talking about. Those three key elements, where if we're too locked into an idea of who we are, who we should be, then we're going to suffer. So that inflexibility around self-related things, ties into the being curious instead of being locked into like this is how I want it to be. I'm going to just try to push. It's really about what is this? And I think I would say the wise effort really the seed crystal for that is just seeing what causes the most suffering and what leads away from the suffering. And so, being selfish or self-centered or focused on just me is exhausting and just not very rewarding at the end of the day. I would say that's where, at least for me, that's where the hedonic treadmill comes from.
Mhm.
And I would say the wise effort has come from seeing what it's like to step off that hedonic treadmill and just to follow the curiosity, and at the same time see that is totally aligned with helping others. And both of those are life-giving and energizing and
Yeah.
connecting. I love, it really connects me with others. You talked about this, when you're curious with your clients, and I would say those, it naturally leads down that road of wise effort.
Mhm. Nice. Yeah, my mom was at the last retreat, summer retreat that Thich Nhat Hanh gave, and when she would go on his summer retreat, she would paint what she would, like, have a watercolor in the back, and then she'd transcribe his, Dharma talks. And so I have one of these journals that she made, and on one side, it has, the painting of Thai at the front of the meditation hall, and the topic was on right right effort. There's different ways of saying this: right diligence, right effort, wise effort. And in it, it said, because I'm picking up on the word seed, but in it, it said something to the effect of, right diligence or right effort is choosing the right seeds and then watering them. And when you water them, it will create happiness in others. And then that happiness in others will also create happiness in yourself, right? So that is exactly what you're talking about, is the choosing of the seeds, and seeing those seeds also in your graduate students and your undergrads, encouraging them to water them with their own curiosity, and stepping out of yourself, and doing this for something more than just you. And then it benefits you and benefits others. So you've done that in your career for sure. And you're such a good example of it.
Well,
So it was fun to have this conversation with you.
it has been fun, and I'm very fortunate to be standing on the shoulders of many giants who've all, provided the fertile ground and the watering of the seeds for me.
Yeah. Yeah. All those professors at Princeton and Yale. Okay. Good. Thank you, Dr. Jen. Wonderful to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.